Hi. Hello, everybody. Am I audible? If you could just put a message in the chat. Awesome. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so hi, and we're really glad to have you here with fantastic numbers. So today we have an amazing session by Matthew Buxton. So Matt has worked for the last 16 years in games and media. He's been a part of the industry as a 3D artist, a level designer, a game designer, a lecturer, startup founder, and most recently a game design director at Rovio in Stockholm. So that's the same amazing studio that brought you the Angry Birds franchise, Small Town Murders, and Darkfire Heroes, to name a few of them. His journey has taken him from the UK to Portugal to Germany and finally Sweden. He's worked on a range of platforms, all the way from the PS2, the PC, and mobile. He has a great talk today. It's called Starting Games, Turning the Impossible into the Very Difficult. Now, before I just call him in, just like to make a few notes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them to Matt in the Q&A panel that's on the right. It's a tab. We'll also be circulating a feedback form. Please fill it out. It's a quick survey with 2 questions, and it really helps us to get feedback from you guys. So thank you, and I will just bring on Matthew.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Matthew. Okay,
how's it going?
You can take it away.
Okay, so first off, I'm going to share my screen, and bear in mind when I do this, I can't see the comments and things like this, so I will have to flip back regularly. I will proceed to do this now. Good times. Okay, so I'm just back in there. Can everyone see this? Cool. Right. So my talk is about starting games. And essentially, it's turning the impossible into the very difficult, or even the very, very difficult. And you might be thinking, hold up, why would I want to turn the impossible into just the very, very difficult? And it's one of those things that it's really important to understand that essentially it's really, really hard to make games. And what we try to do and what we can do best is to make it that little bit less impossible. So here's a quick overview of the talk. I'm going to be on for about 45 minutes and then questions. I do have a little bit of a habit of going very quickly, so I'm hoping it's not 10 minutes and then questions, but here we go. So a little bit about me first. So I've been working 16 years in games. I started off as a 3D artist way back in 2005 or something like that, or 4, working on PS2. Around about the time when everyone was giving their PS2 to the younger siblings. So making such wonderful games like Home Alone and Mr. Bean for DS. I've worked in the UK, primarily for Jagex. I worked there for quite some time. Worked in Portugal for Miniclip. I know it's very popular in India, 8 Ball Pool. Worked in Germany for King, amongst others, and most recently I'm in Sweden. So in Sweden, I worked for MAG Interactive as a design director, and I'm currently now at Rovio as the game design director for Rovio Stockholm. I also lecture, so I've lectured in the UK, Germany, Sweden, primarily just to sort of student game designers, getting them into the subject and giving them some breakdowns on UX and that. So what I also do is I handle new games a lot. I've been part of ideation teams and ideation leads. So in my 16 years, I know quite a bit about starting games that don't go anywhere, as well as games that do. So back to the point, making games is hard. And you don't say. It's making successful games is also virtually impossible. So just as a sort of a thing to think about, in Q1 this year, there were 477,000 games in total available on Play Store. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them were good or all of them were successful. But if you also think that you have an average of 800 games a day released on iOS, it's a lot of games coming out, but the top 100 grossing, it barely changes. It changes a bit, but not so often. So in this climate of making games being incredibly hard, what do we do about this? One of the things is it takes considerable time and investment. Even the hyper casual takes time and investment to reach the potential of one big casual game. You have to do many shots, and you have to hit many of those shots, even with hyper casual. So you need constant production. It's not fire and forget like the big old console releases where everyone buys it because they have the console. It's only fire and forgotten, which is not as catchy, and I don't think anyone wants to be part of that. So making successful games takes longer, and the reason for that is there's no such thing as a safe bet. And this is one of the things that we often think, that we're going to try and make a game that's very similar to something out there and it's going to be super successful. Often that's not the case. So why am I telling you this and you already know it? I mean, well, it could be because I'm a massive troll. No, not really. It's because making your next game, the one that isn't successful, is so much harder. And you're going to try it anyway. Everyone tries to do the next game, and you're most likely going to launch a cardboard supercar, which is you're going to release too early with not enough features, and when you try and drive it, it's going to fall apart. And you might say to yourself, why would we do that? Why would we, after our previous success, release something a bit pants? And the reason for this is, like, making the second game is actually harder than the first. One-hit game companies are more common than you think. And those that have more games often take longer and spend more money to find the next big hit. So what about those companies that release many games until they find a massive hit? Any game that is profitable enough to sustain the business counts as a hit. So this is a bit about definitions, because often you think about your second game as the one that follows your huge success. That's probably really your second game. The first game that was a hit was enough to sustain your company, enough to pay the bills, keep the lights on, keep the design team growing. So this is why it's very hard once you have a hit to make a second one, because you've already done the hard work first. And it's so difficult to create new products that generally people acquire more than they release. Like Zynga, for example, does a lot of buying in studios and games. So the best way to ensure the success of your second product without buying it is to invest significantly more in terms of production and marketing than the first one. As you can see, making games is probably as hard as Trap Adventure, which is pretty difficult. So onwards. People often wonder why it is that when you have a company that's already up and you've already started, why does the second game take a longer time and is harder and is more difficult than the first? Because often people are thinking, like, my first game that we built by few people, and it was in a shorter time than the last prototype that didn't even pass. We made it by a couple of friends, some early hires, and not much more than you pay a junior. Can't be that hard, right? I mean, we were successful. We had this game. There was only a few of us, just a business guy. We paid one artist. And we did it all in 3 weeks and only ate noodles and coffee, and suddenly it succeeded. Well, there's a reason why it is the magic's gone. And you might think to yourself, what magic? It was hell. It was hell. We were barely surviving. So here's what the magic is in terms of a small team. It's a great idea. It's total autonomy. It's having a near ideal team, people who work together with each other and know each other very well. And also, one of the things that's really important is that most people are, invested in the success. So in that early team, it's very likely that if your game does well, then you're going to be financially sorted. It's going to be a life-changing sum of money. So of course you're going to be working as hard as you possibly can, because not only are you invested in the success, but you have real consequences for failure. I mean, there's a reason Final Fantasy is called Final Fantasy, because it was the last fantasy game that they were intending to do before the studio was shuttered. So this is one of the things that the magic is that you have the ability to do exactly what you want to do. You have a great idea, and your team is all the people that you just want to work with. And everyone on that team has a really good chance of success and a really, really devastating failure if it goes wrong. And the final thing is, remember those thousands of games that release every month? Well, you got lucky. So the fact that you're sitting there thinking, why can't we do it again? You often forget that your first release that was actually very successful and that made the big splash was possibly or largely a product of luck. And this is why it's difficult to kind of bottle lightning. Lightning strikes and then it comes again. Sorry, I'm having a cat. Oh dear. Okay. So my question to you is, do you really need a new game? I mean, it might seem silly. It might seem silly to ask this. You want to build a new game. You have a game that's out there. Maybe the users are going down a little bit. If it's already profitable and you've got users and KPIs that are stable, it's a lot easier to build on that. I mean, look at Archero. This is literally what everyone says to someone, or someone has said to them for the last couple of years. Everyone says, hey, look at Archero. Maybe we should do Archero. Maybe we should make Archero, but with this, or maybe we should just, yeah. So that game it came out with like very dodgy asset store assets, and it's maybe hit top 50 grossing, but they've sustained it and they've nurtured it and they've been working away on it. And only when it's really going okay and it's really, really stable, have they started to bring out the new games. And look at us in Rovio. We've been keeping Angry Birds alive, well updated for years. One good game and lots of improvements from very basic beginnings. Grow this, and then you have the security to do more games. And it's really important to when you're in the state where you have a successful game, is to not let that success dry up. Because if you let that success dry up, then the virtually impossible task of creating a new game with an entirely different set of circumstances will be made impossible, because you need luck. And to have luck, you need time. And to have time, you need money. And to have money, you need to make sure that your existing game is still alive and healthy. But then again, you do need a new game, because you can't run on one forever. And you will make one. So, starting game 2. We already know it's impossible. We already know it's very, very difficult. But when should you think about starting game 2? Well, the best time to think about it is when you're scaling game 1, even if you don't plan to start it. And the reason for this is, you know that the development will take longer than game 1, because you will stray away slightly from the ideal situation that you had, the pressure, the team, the motivation, the high reward. So development will take longer. And especially since probably what will happen is you'll be supporting your first game with the majority of your company. So you will probably start slower, and you'll probably start with less urgency. Also, the learnings you have from game 1 will make game 2 more likely to succeed. And the team that created the first success is still together. That's also a massive bonus. The next best time to start game two is now. And it's always good to have a really strong concept for game two and to make sure that you can actually deliver on this. So let's see. The reason for this is game two is the game changer. It's your chance to create a genre-defining hit. You can build more and you can build better. You can improve all of those systems that you hard-coded back in the days, and then only someone who knows a very bizarre programming language like Haskell or something can actually fix it. You can put the learnings to use. You can, for example, cut systems that never worked for you in the first place. You can make your levels easier or harder from the start. You can increase the availability of power-ups and things like this that you wanted to. And it also allows you to expand your presence in the genre. You have cross-promotion from your first game, and your second game should monetize more and be more effective. It gives you a wider reach. Once you have 2 games up and running, it allows you to spread yourself more easily and have more organics. You can also bring the audience from game 1 into a more profitable game 2. So, for example, if you have a game that's been running and it's long in the tooth, 5 years, 7-year game, if you create a new version of the same game with a better monetization system, maybe more efficient or more enjoyable experience, then you can bring the audience through. So it's really good to have game 2, especially a very strong game 2. And often, game 2 is probably what everyone thinks of as your game 1. So game 2 is the thing that could be the massive hit. If you have something that's not inside the top 200 grossing, that's your game 1. Game 2 could be that chance. Because when you actually have the time to put together a bit of a war chest to sort of spend and to get users, when you have some data, when you have a bigger team, you actually do have a better chance to make not just a sort of a hit, but make something truly successful. And you see that in the one game companies, there were probably many, many more games that failed and some that succeeded before they had their proper hit, which we all think of as game 1, but it could have been game 27. So moving on. How do you start? Given all I've said about the scale of the task, how on earth do you even tackle it? So this is what usually happens, and you can kind of see if this gels with your own experience. Usually, we break out into a very small team and start prototyping a game. The game, any game, is it the game that you've done before? We then tell the small team, make an MVP, minimum viable product, make it fast. We'll test the art as you build it. We'll release the MVP in 3 months. No more time. Got to be quick, super speedy. And then what happens? It gets terrible numbers. We do some light iteration, possibly even removing one of the devs or artists. Sorry, I have to remove a stray cat. And then we shut it down. And we do this, and we do this again and again and again. Some of the reasons for this is because we don't like to invest too much. We don't like to put the new game team in the situation that the original game team were, or the original company were, where they had full autonomy and the ability to make something kind of important. What we do is we say, we made it with juniors. Here's some juniors. Start a game. If it's very, very good, we'll give you the chance to build it into a real game. Often that kind of breaks things before we start. So what do we do about this? How do we address this one? Well, I want to take you back to the kind of some of the things that basically have been going around the industry and going around tech for a long time. And one of these things, you may have heard some variation of this in many, many forms. Execution is what matters, never the idea. It's only the execution, like the ideas. There's millions of ideas, but it works for great ideas that everyone has, for simple ideas like let's buy things online. Let's create a professional social network like LinkedIn, or let's make a washing machine. The idea of a washing machine is so fantastic that creating one is really just down to the execution. but it doesn't really work for us, does it? And this is one of the things that is just, we say it and then we do the exact opposite and we play the exact opposite and we listen to people creating the exact opposite. So why do we keep convincing ourselves of this kind of fallacy? Well, games are different. Obviously, looking at this, you think, oh, games are not different. They're all Squid Game. But you can see what's up here. It's not the execution that counts here. It's the idea, isn't it? The idea was to follow Squid Game, one of the most successful cultural moments. It's not an idea that's copying another game. It is literally bringing something that is fantastic to the audience that wants it now. Who is successful? Anyone who gets there first. Are they successful due to the execution? Probably not. So this is just a little snapshot from the Play Store, or PlayStation advert, as you mentioned with this. But it is the idea here. It's not the execution. I mean, some of them are probably even barely games, but they get downloads. You can see one of them's 2-star rated. In fact, quite a few of them are. But some of them who get popular, they make it. They make the success. And why? Because of the idea. So if execution mattered, why the hell would we make an MVP? This makes no sense. People will say, it's the execution that matters, never the idea. Then why would you do an MVP? Just finish the game, because an MVP is very badly executed. And that's generally the thing. It's generally very badly executed. If it matters so much, the execution matters so much, why are we so concerned with time to market? Because if the idea doesn't matter, why do we rush? We could take 3 years to make a game, and we could make it beautiful and polished, and we could make it absolutely perfect and beautiful in every little UI button and UX button, supremely clickable and touchable and lovely. But we're saying, no, you have to do it quickly. Why are we concerned you're doing it quickly? Because it's the idea, isn't it? And if execution mattered, why are there not so many successful game twos? This is the interesting point, because your first game was probably badly made by a bunch of friends, desperate for cash and only with small limited runway from VCs. But now you have the money. Why don't you just make something fantastic and beautiful and spend a lot of time on it? Well, you don't do that, do you? Because it's the idea that matters, not the execution, which is quite funny. So obviously not all ideas are equal, though. If you go back to this, if you build Archero plus X game, it will be amazing. I'm sure many people have said this to you, or you might have said this to other people. Or let's create an NFT-based game with a huge metaverse and no objective, because that's exactly what a tiny team can handle. I'm pretty sure that there will be many metaverses with at least 5 angry people in them, and it will be a very weird experience. And the other bad idea is you can definitely jump and catch that cricket ball like you did at 14 and not put your back out and stretch something. So not all ideas are equal, and that's the important. Execution is more straightforward for us, but good ideas are critical. The reason it's straightforward for us is we have a process. We have producers, we have product managers, we have game engines that are standardized so that we can hire people from all over the world. We've got people in our studio from Canada, from India, from Turkey. We've got people from South America, from Scandinavia, from England, Ireland, you name it. And this is because we have a standardized process. We have standardized game engines. We work in a common language. We can use research tools like Playtest Cloud. We have market trend tools like App Annie and Game Refinery. And we already made a great game. If that is all of the things that we have to make sure that execution is actually not the hardest part of this, because basically given any idea with any mid-sized game company, you can potentially make it. And it's not necessarily the execution that sets you out. As with the Squid Game people, it's the timing of the idea. So why am I also saying all of these confusing things that sound exactly like the opposite of what you want to do? What next? Think. You have to think. And that's where you get to the new beginnings. So when you're coming up with ideas and when you're coming up with new games, it's not necessarily about copying something. It's not necessarily about ideas from workshops. They don't come from workshops. They're presented in them. Ideas come from the shower, the shows you watch, the games you play, your childhood, the things you've experienced, the holiday you've been on, even staring at the wall. And people are creative when they have the right setting for them to be. And ideas need to be... What is that? Okay, interesting. So ideas need to be a bit more unique. And you need to have motivation. And the motivation of chasing a whale is that you're going to obviously be a successful company. And rewards are underrated. And this is one of the things that I would say is really interesting about the way that we try to commission a game too. We have founders making game ones who benefit immensely from the success of the first game. And we then create a sort of an environment where we have employees creating the next best game, which is meant to do more and to expand the company and be even more successful than the previous one. So why don't we reward their success more? So rewards for success are free until success exists. This is really important to understand, because if you are not successful, why are you worrying about the potential that you'll be paying these people royalties? It's royalties on something you do not own and you do not have. 80% of nothing is 80% of nothing. It's still zero. It doesn't matter. If you say you're going to give them royalties and they don't make the game, then you're not paying royalties. However, if you just pay people normally and you don't give anyone bonuses and you don't give them a good motivation, then why would they bother succeeding? Why would they bother adding to your success? They need to have buy-in. You need to be motivated for your own purpose. Because think about how you made your game one. You made your game one by having this intrinsic motivation. You had this motivation to either succeed and have success in a great company, or fail and go back to working in your previous place. Why would you not give some of that success chance to people you have making game two? And remember, games are really hard. Really, really hard. Tough times can be a driving force, but it's also a risk. Just because you can put pressure on a team to produce, without the reward, the pressure is nothing. There is nothing other than a job well done. And a job well done will only take you so far. Remember, we're talking about fostering ideas and creativity. You can't foster ideas and creativity with endless crunch and lack of rewarding. It's not going to happen. You have to be very generous with rewards. You have to be very sure that you can be tough. And you have to remember the games are hard and no one's going to succeed necessarily straight away. And also, a team building its own idea that it came up with is seen as a risk. Why is this? That's how you started your own company. Like, why would you do this? This is literally the thing that you did that made you successful. You hired all of these people. You interviewed them all. You thought they were all good. You pay them actual money to come to your place and work for you. And then they say, hey, we have a really good idea. We want to have a small team build this. You're like, no. Look at the market. Look at other designers. Other designers I have never spoken to, never hired, and they're making something different and it makes money. That's not how you made a game. You need to reconstruct a creative, exciting environment with lots of rewards. And that's only then will pressure have any kind of effect on anything. Otherwise, you'll just be left with kind of sad people, because since making games is hard, there is no real consequence of failure in a company that's already stable. So why would you do a great job? And there we go. And the people. This is one thing to remember. A good team with psychological safety is unstoppable. Team composition is important and changes with the state of the game. You have different stages. You have concept stage, where you have a visionary who's a lead or a designer who keeps the focus on the idea. Because remember, as we said, ideas are really important. You have the architect, the developer who has a prototype mindset. That developer can create anything, be happy to throw it away, can code themselves into a corner, happy to throw it away. Prototype mindset is incredibly important. Release, check it. If it works, fine. And then you need the artist, someone who is fast, wide-ranging concept, animation, VFX. Obviously, a unicorn. Not everyone has them. These people can be several people. It's not all on one person, but this is the archetypes you need within this. You need the visionary, the architect, and the artist. These are the archetypes that will make a good team. And this team needs to be a very good team with psychological safety. They can say anything to each other. What it doesn't necessarily need is a strong driver or a strong leader. It needs to focus on the idea. But if I'm a designer, I am going to be very unable to tell the developer, no, it should be like this. If the developer has a better solution and that is still keeping the focus on the idea, then go with the better solution. If I'm working with an artist and the artist says, we're going to have green hearts in this game, I'm not the artist. I'm not there for the artistic judgment. Psychological safety is about giving the artist the trust to do that. Even if I think it's a terrible idea to have green hearts instead of red hearts, and neither of us actually care because so many people are colorblind, it's a very bizarre thing to do anyway, but some people only see the heart shape. Trust them. Trust each other. Don't tell them what to do. You listen to each other. That's super important. And extra skills as the game progresses, you need the banker. So someone who's a PM, BI, economy-faced designer who can really assess the data, look at the things that you're doing and find the value. Because at the end of the day, people spend money when they see a value for it. You can't be coerced into spending money. You can't be tricked into spending money and then have that as a sustainable business. Even people who are tricked, see the value in it. That's why people play gambling and slot machines, because they see the value. The value is the potential of a huge reward and the cost is very low. And it's the same in games. If you want a skin in Minecraft, the value is appropriate to what you get, the kudos amongst your friends. And someone in the banker archetype is someone who can assess the value of the things you make and charge a good, generous price for it that will have people buying things. You also need a timekeeper. The timekeeper is a producer, keeping the project focused on the right choices, not telling you what to do, not saying this is the thing that we have to work on. It's of these things that you need to do, which one now and why? And what does that get you? Does that get you closer to testing? Does that get you closer to finishing a tool to implement something, which will speed up the process? It's really about keeping within the time, but also asking and being there with the team to say, are we making the right decisions? And with this, a team is unstoppable. It's a bit like in Squid Game, when you have a collection of people who are very, very bad at tug of war, suddenly being very, very good at tug of war. It's the same principle. Everyone needs to listen to each other. Everyone needs to be there for each other and not to bark their sort of orders. It just doesn't work. And it's probably not how your first game was made. First game was made probably with collaboration, with people saying, I'm not a developer. I'm not going to touch that. I'm the business person. I will do this. I'm the designer. I can make these systems. It's collaboration. It was talking. It was joking. This is probably generally how your first game started. I don't think it necessarily started in a business meeting where people were sitting there thinking, yes, we should definitely make this kind of game and it will be very, very fun. But even if it did, fair play to you. Keep that magic alive. This is how quiz games get made, I swear. So on to the process. And despite what I'm saying and despite how I'm saying it, there is a process. There always needs to be a process. Otherwise, it's going to go very, very wrong very quickly. So it's an easy, simple set of guidelines to help create freely, but retain focus. And the reason for this is to understand your next objective as you're finishing your first objective. There should never be a point where you're bottlenecked by someone on the team or one of the archetypes on the team. There should always be, the designer should always be laying the track for the developer, and the artist should always be concepting with and ahead for the designer, and then also being there at the right stage. Everyone should kind of know how the railway is being built before the train goes along there. So it can vary depending on your team, and it can be held by a person overlooking the team. So it could be held by someone in an ideation role who's not actually part of the game team. Or it could be by the team themselves. Remember, if you have a timekeeper, this probably makes it easier. It doesn't have to be the producer's job, though. And treat it game people who are making games with small teams, treat it like you're investing in their new startup, because you actually literally are. It's their startup. You're giving them budget, you're giving them headcount, you're giving them runway. And the question is, if you looked at the budget, the headcount, and the runway you give your team and think, could we have done it with that? You're probably quite surprised and ever so slightly ashamed that you're essentially thinking that you can kind of blag your way into doing what you did. I think you'll find that actually it was slightly more generous than you would be inclined to give. So the next part is, I like to call it the ever so fun long haul. As we discussed, making games is really hard and it takes time. And what might start out as a visionary idea that everyone wants to work on and everyone wants to be part of, it can turn into a multi-year slog, even on the best games. Even on the best games, there have been many, many games in soft launch that have been taking a long time before they came out and were very successful. Brawl Stars, 522 days. That must have been a record somewhere. A very, very long soft launch, but it came out and it did great and everyone loved it. And this is the thing, that each stage of the game comes with a new set of challenges. And part of the challenge is, can you find people who are motivated not to just get the quick wins of your little startup environment and actually produce a long a long game that can last for, say, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And to do that, the team has to work for a longer time or be a bigger team, and has to work in a way that you're not just coding things randomly and stacking yourself up with technical debt. So there we go. I think some of the developers in the audience would be like, whew, it's not telling us just to hack our way through everything. So, slow burn versus burnout. One thing that's often not taken into account is that you're not just competing with your current games, but the games that are in production. You're competing with other teams, other small companies, other big companies, with other teams of various sizes, and they're all in production based on current trends as well. They've all seen the same shows as you. They probably share many of the same interests. They probably play you online in various games like Fortnite or Magic or any of these kind of games online. You're probably fighting those other designers across the world and simultaneously building a very similar game. So you have to be aware that what you're making is probably not necessarily entirely unique, but what it will be is certainly it will be in a different competition landscape from what you start with. And that's something that you need to think about and try to extrapolate forwards a little bit. What are the major trends in technology? What are the major trends in development? And where can you see this going? And you need incentive. Again, you need incentive to keep people motivated, but the time to realization is long. And this is why it's really important to understand the difference of a dedicated small team of founders who will happily beaver away on a company for 10 years before it goes public. Why? Success. If you want people to beaver away on a game for 2 years before it goes public, what do you need to give them? Success. How do you do that? You have a tight-knit team with a clear vision and commitment. That's really the base level. Scale the team carefully as needed. And you have to have clear goals and expectations at regular levels, as if you were investing in their startup. Think of it, you are investing in the startup. You've got the timekeeper, you've got the banker, you've got the archetypes in there who are creating something fantastic. That's not what you care about. You don't get in there and say, well, I don't really like this. Why is the trees purple? I never seen purple trees. None of the successful games have purple trees. This is the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is that you have a successful product. You have a lot of experience building your product. You can be there for advice, but you certainly can't be there to tell them what to do, because then how would you feel when you started your company and your seed stage investors turned up and were like, really? You're going to use that? Oh, I don't think so. Panic. That's what would have happened. Panic. And you will panic them and you will scare them and you will stop them producing something. They will play it safe and they will fail, and it will be your fault. And you will have wasted all of your precious money because you wanted to either save some time, or you weren't quite sure, or you didn't quite trust them. If you don't trust them, don't hire them. Simple. Can't get any simpler than that. If you don't trust them, don't hire them. Don't trust other designers you haven't met in companies that you are not, because you don't know if they made a really good system in Marvel or Champions, or you don't know if they're just patching something that they messed up earlier. Trust your own team, trust your team, give them psychological safety, give them a really good incentive, and check on them and make sure that they're fulfilling their obligations. They will be happy to if the reward is fantastic. And also, don't bloat your game. You're not making a pumpkin spice latte, you're making an espresso. And it's about not releasing an MVP. The MVP of an espresso is a coffee bean. It still tastes like espresso, it's still strong. But an espresso is an espresso, it's not a latte. It's not released. The MVP of a latte is not an espresso. The MVP of a latte is a coffee bean and a cow. This is not how these things work together. You have to make a good, small, self-contained game that is rich and deep, but it is not big. And that's a very big difference from an MVP to making something more like a minimum lovable product, say. It's the difference between you want to make this big latte, or you see all the lattes in. This is really where it comes down to. You see all the lattes on the market, and you say, people really like those pumpkin spice lattes, don't they? What about we take another root vegetable and we're going to do sweet potato spice lattes? And you're like, okay, so let's get the development team together. What do? We give them one potato cutter and some hot water. MVP, not the same, is it? So no bloat, espresso after latte, MVP is not necessarily the right way to think of this. Also, tech debt, not even once. Well, actually, there is a balance. There is a balance between tech debt and production, which is the state you fall into when you have something good that's very, very good, and you're so excited, you think, let's carry on and not throw it all away. When in fact, you should be like, let's freeze the idea, because this is what you've proven. You've proven the idea, not the execution. Remember the two differences between execution. Us in games, we can do execution really, really well. We're really good at it. We have so many processes and we have so many good things in the industry. We can do that really, really well. But what we can't do is we can't say, let's change the idea because our execution's failing. So freeze the idea and throw away the code and start again. But start again on the same idea and do the same thing. Just do it better so it doesn't fall over. There's a balance between perfect, elegant code and releasing while you're still relevant. Remember, ideas, not execution. You have to be relevant. You can't work forever. Otherwise you'd just be releasing far too late to the market. And so maintain this and take on the tech debt only for key gains that validate your idea. If you have to take on tech debt, and sometimes you do, sometimes you have to hand make some levels or hand make something like this because you don't have the time. But doing this will get you to a state where you know so much more about your game. Then that's where you have to do it. What you don't do is, in that situation when you proved your point, continue to take on more tech debt because you proved your point. That's fine. You validated. Now fix the tech debt before it all breaks. And never, ever take on tech debt that is going to absolutely kill the product. It seems quite simple to say, but sometimes you get to that critical stage where there's literally nothing you can touch. And even if it would have been successful, the product is dead. And that surprisingly can happen because of how success is so rare. The temptation to chase that success is so high that sometimes it leads us to forget about that execution, while not as important as the idea, is something we should do well. It's not that execution is not important. It's a given. We have to execute well. So there we go. And how long is too long? This is one of the things that I think people struggle with the most, is when to understand when a game is failing. So clear targets and results. It's very simple. You're investing in them. You're not telling them what to do. The team tells you what they want to do. You say, we need these targets. We want to get these results by here. And they say, here are our targets we want to hit. Don't move the goalposts. That's from team and from anyone else. If you said you have 6 months, don't make it 3 and then say, why don't you have anything at 3? Because they're working to 6. They might be making decisions about tech debt. They might be doing things that you can't see necessarily. Don't move the goalposts as the team. Don't say, we're going to start out with this MOBA, but then actually we really want to make, we're going to make an open world up. No, you're not. If you can't make the MOBA, close the MOBA. Simple as that. It's beware. Also, this is a weird one, but it happens a lot. Beware of creating a state where avoiding failure is better than ending the project. I'll give you an example for why. If you are the kind of company that assigns leaders as a role and not as a sort of job title, it could be the state that you're actually incentivizing that team to carry on, because dissolving the project might mean that they don't initially start another project, or it might mean that there's a team reshuffle, or even in the worst case, they will split up and send up to other things. And the problem with that is that incentivizes to stay together, whether it's working or not. So beware of that. Beware of creating this weird state where it's actually bad to fail. But when it comes to time, be ready to give time for big changes, big, proper, important changes. We have this puzzle game. It's not working, but we see there's some promise in this particular thing. We want to change the method that people are adding blocks to the board. That's a big change. That's something you give time for. It's not the case of, well, we have 32% retention. Maybe if we make level 10 a little easier, that generally never works. I mean, you can generally see a success when it's coming. So beware of trying to do very small changes, a lot of very small changes. This is what we were talking about earlier with the iterate. You iterate for a couple of weeks very lightly, and you think that, there's a silver bullet. We just tweak these values. You're not going to tweak the values to success. You tweak the values of a successful game to become very successful. This is why a game designer is like, I'm going to try and say this, multiplicative. No, a game designer multiplies the design, whereas a PM is additional and adds to the design. You can't treat a game project like a PM at the start, because if you're just changing the numbers, you're going to get very, very small impacts. What you need to do is you need to change parts of the design, but not the idea. Maybe that's a bit of a mess to explain, but change the design, not the idea. The idea is what you're going for. Test the idea. And if the idea fails, then it fails. And set a date to hit the original target. Don't change the target. You were going to say we wanted 45% retention. We wanted it. Change the date, same target, identify where you failed, and learn from it. Simple. Never that simple. Nothing simple. As we discussed, making games is very, very hard. How do you win, though? So we know that we're turning the impossible into very, very difficult. You win by you remove the risks. You remove the risks from the team, from the idea, and from the launch. And principally, you do this with money, because that's the thing that you have from game one, and that's the thing that you can use on game two to give it a better chance. Remember, you're fighting luck. You were lucky. There were so many other people with equally fantastic ideas and probably nicer, more elegant code that just fell by the wayside in those 800 games a day released. So remember, you were lucky, and you remove the risks by essentially spending the money you earn. And you remove them from the team and the idea and the launch. So the team, incentivized, close-knit, autonomous, no distractions. They're not making other things. They're not working on maintaining some other live code. If you can't do that, don't have them yet. Fix your first game, make your first game better. Split the team. They are autonomous. They are close-knit. There is no distractions. The idea plays to your strengths. Did you do it before? Do you have experience in this way? Are your designers keen on it? Is this something that your first game does really, really well and you think that you can improve it? Does it have a target audience? Is it valuable? Play to the things that you've done well in the idea, and then you should be able to do a bit better. Or play to something that everyone strongly believes in. And if you have a close-knit team, then you'll be able to do that. So coming to the end of this, I know there'll be time for questions soon, and there's probably a survey out there as well. So the launch, use the tools you have available and testing to validate before you scale, and invest in your success. When you are successful, invest quickly, because otherwise you could lose the money. Because remember, it's the idea, and the idea is all about timing as well. Conclusion, if there is one. Conclusion: making games is impossible without truthfully examining your previous success. It really is. You have to actually look at why you were successful when you were this awesome, scrappy little company and think, were you just lucky? What were the things that you did? You have to create that motivated startup, but protect the team from failure with your best practice experience and testing. You have been there, you've done it, you've fought those hard battles, and you profited immensely from it. So you create, like, with this knowledge, you help them, and you have a motivated little startup, and you protect them with all of the things that you can do and the best practices of the industry that you couldn't do at the time when you did it. Making game two is hard. If you succeed, everyone's going to think it's your game one. It's going to be the big one. And making games is very, very hard. But when you play the cards you have and invest everything in the right way, that's how you started, right? That's how you started. And I believe it's time for questions. So not exactly sure how the audio works. Question: I've heard that getting people to pitch their own ideas is the best recipe for getting people more involved in the game and making the process more enjoyable. How do you get some people who aren't too creative to chip into the game? Good question. Motivation. Why would you want to pitch into a game? If you feel like your idea is not going to be listened to, you're less likely to say it. You need to create a trusting environment where someone is not going to be afraid to say their idea. If they're not too creative, it's really about looking outside of what their assumptions are, of why are they assuming they can't make a game. If they're in the industry and they have some ideas, they should get them out. And it makes the process more enjoyable to get people involved and start the game. So you need a team of people to come up with ideas and chat with each other. But they're not going to come up with ideas in the team. They're going to bring the ideas they already found elsewhere in the environments, with their family, playing with their kids, watching their kids play other games, listening to music, or anything, playing guitar. These people, they are creative. Everyone's creative, but you need to be able to talk and foster the environment where people can talk, and then people will be able to give their ideas. Maybe not on paper, but maybe ask their opinions about certain things. If they don't have a strong idea, maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't need to have a strong idea. If they're happy to follow someone else's strong idea and improve on it, then that's also fine. I hope that answers your question. Do we have more? How game feel matters. So this is a very big question. Game feel is part of what you would say is execution, but I actually think it's part of the idea of the game that you're selling. So game feel, if you take the sort of the Squid Game games, for example, the game should feel like the game. It should feel like you're controlling one person in a mass of people, and it should be very, 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 very tense with a very short time limit, and you should be terrified. And it should be very terrifying. Game feel should reflect the idea, and it matters a lot. And the thing is that you can't get it immediately, so you have to invest time in it. What you can get is you can get the mechanics there, but for game feel, you have to have a sort of a combination of art and concept for the design. And I think game feel is super important, and it's one of those things that you're never going to exactly say we nailed it, but other people will tell you when you haven't, which is about as close as you can get. So the concept is the most important thing. The idea, the game feel is, are you fulfilling your idea well? If you have a game set in the American Midwest, does it feel like you're there? And the idea is, I'm a cowboy. Does the game feel support that idea? And if your game feel doesn't support your idea, then maybe it's not as important. If your idea is that I'm a Formula One driver, then game feel is very, very important of handling the car. But game feel might be less important for the other parts of it. It's really the car is important. So where it supports the idea the strongest, focus on that. I hope that helps. Your favorite games and what have you learned from them? Oh, So many favorite games and so many different things. I think one of my favorite games was Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and what I've learned from that is that you can forego good graphics with a good storyline. No, actually, what I learned from that is I would like to smash pots a lot in a room with a sword, and I will do that again and again and again just to get that one red rupee. And I would just smash the pots even when I knew they weren't giving. The reason for this is what I learned from this is you have something valuable in a game, and a player will do something repeatedly if it's easy to get that. And that's one of the things that pot room may not have been the most fun experience, but it's one of the places I spent the most time. Do I remember exactly how I killed every boss? Not exactly. Do I remember the layouts of every pot in that room? Probably. So just bear in mind that sometimes when you create a need for something, how you satisfy that need in the game should be something important. Because if you drop all of your major currency through big boss fights, then you're going to probably remember the big boss fights. If you, however, create a very convenient smashy farming area, then smashy farming minigame is going to be what you remember. I might just say one more game. One more game. So one more game that I really really like is I love Animal Crossing, and I think what I've learned from Animal Crossing is that when you have the ability to set your own agenda, you naturally become your own little producer, and you set yourself tasks. And it's possible in basically any game, no matter how small the environment, to simulate open world, because Animal Crossing does that very well. It's a very, very small island, the latest one, but it really does simulate the open world experience. I can do many, many activities, even in a small area. It makes that game feel bigger. And this is the same with if you look at the map sizes on Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Nothing compared to Breath of the Wild, but the simulation, the feeling of open world was there. And that's something it's about your objectives. Open world is often about your objectives, and sometimes a big open world with few objectives doesn't seem as fun as a small open world with many repeatable tasks that are each one individually satisfying. Any more questions? What's the maximum time I could invest if I'm solo developing? Well, you can look at some of the examples around of Stardew Valley. Someone, Concerned Ape, spent many, many years doing this. I wouldn't advise it. I would say that solo developing it's very risky, because unless you have an incredible idea, and your execution is also fully supporting that idea. Stardew Valley is like the execution, 8-bit, everything fully supports the idea that you are this little farmer in this community of people that you can make friends with, and you can have this social interaction world. But it's set in the West. It fully supports that. If you have a very, very strong idea and you have good promise, then you can spend almost an infinite time doing it. What I wouldn't recommend is doing that in the long term, because the thing is, as we say, making games is hard. The amount of shots you have on target with a solo game is very, very small. You have one arrow in your bow, and the target is fast moving, and you have to build the bow yourself, fletch it. You also have to polish it. You have to cut down the tree for the wood. You have to do every little thing. You even have to buy the target, or you even have to buy the target and put it there. Because you have to do absolutely every single thing you can, be incredibly sure of your idea and incredibly committed to it. But please eat. Please do another job. Please have some way of getting some respite. But it's really about, does your idea have the right execution? Is what you're making fulfilling your idea? And your idea should be simple and explainable to anyone. But yeah, it's kind of up to you then. Any more questions? I can
All right.
see. Yep. Thank
Yeah, that's all the time we have. And
you so much.
Okay, I just want to say that was amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be a part of this. It was such a learning experience. A big thank you to our wonderful audience. We've also shared a feedback form in the chat. Please be sure to fill it in. Your feedback really helps us to get amazing sessions like these. Yeah, be sure to catch our next session tomorrow at about 6 p.m. We have Torva Olafsson coming on. He's the creative director of the Minecraft franchise, and he'll be speaking on writing and developing game narratives. And yeah, I'd like to take this moment to thank all our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, which was Unreal Engine, our gold sponsors, which are MPL, AWS, Glance, and Jungly. Our legacy silver sponsors, GameShin, Lakshya, and YesNo. Our bronze sponsors, Quali and Gameo. Hyper Casual Track sponsor, Sunday. And finally, our IP Connect sponsor, Succeed Innovation Fund. Thank you so much, everyone, especially Matthew, for being a part of this. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully, I will see you all in person next year.
Definitely. Okay. All right, I'll catch you backstage.
All right.
Bye. All right. Thanks for that, everyone. This was awesome.